Welcome to the darkness. There is no escape.
Even though it was in 2016, I can still clearly recall every detail of the evening. At least 4 or 5 times a year, I spend time in the forests to the south of my town. I kind of simply felt the need to go out and spend some time by myself this past weekend. I hurriedly packed my backpack and got behind the wheel, down to the trail I like best. To be honest, I have no idea if the trail that was shown on maps was actually a real one. I'm not sure if it was well known, because no one ever hiked or camped on it. After parking close to the trees on the side of the road, I grabbed my luggage and trekked for 2 hours. There were no mountains in this area of the forest. It was merely heavily covered with trees and extremely flat, excellent for a leisurely camping excursion lasting 1 or 2 days, but nothing longer because it can become monotonous. There wasn't much to the campsite. I took my time making everything perfect and lighting the bonfire because there were still a few hours until dusk. I ate some trail mix and unwinded while listening to the birds tweeting and the cozy fire. I threw in additional sticks as the sun sank. I've always thought it's fascinating how the forest can shift from being so vibrant to practically instantly becoming silent. Once the sun has set, only approximately 25 minutes after dark, did I sit there and listen to the solitude before an odd sound broke the stillness. It was music. It was coming from far away. It sounded like an ancient classical music and was quite far away. It nearly sounded like a vintage record player. I got up and turned to face the direction it was coming from. Was there another campground close by? Perhaps it was a group of people performing music, albeit loudly, in a casual manner. I spent some time just listening at my campground. It had to be 30, at least a few minutes. However, the tune never changed, which was strange and, to be honest, a little unsettling. The emptiness of the quiet woods was filled with the same classical melody on loop. Normally, I don't give a damn whether other campers are close by, having a boisterous campfire party, or doing anything else, but today felt different. I didn't like the way things were going. I made the decision to get a little closer to observe what was happening for those 30 minutes. I wanted to make sure it was nothing strange so I could sleep tonight, but I didn't want to pry on anyone. I picked up my flashlight and headed in the direction of the noise. It seemed more stranger that I could hear it from so far away because it felt like I was walking quite a distance. But the closer I got and the louder the music, the more eerie it became. My heart was beating a little quicker, and I could tell I had goosebumps. I realized then that all I had brought was my flashlight. I didn't even consider bringing my pepper spray or pocket knife. I eventually realized that I was getting quite close. I couldn't see anything, but the music must have been coming from only 30 or 40 feet away. No campfire, bonfire, or other type of light. Then I noticed it. A massive speaker was perched somewhat behind a tree. It was surrounded by nothing. I looked everywhere with my flashlight, but I couldn't find anyone. I approached the speaker. It appeared to be from the early 2000s. It's basically a huge box with an outdated LCD screen and worn-out control buttons. I located the power button and switched it off. The woodland was silent all of a sudden. It was unsettling how drastically different it was. This was done by whom? It felt almost like a trap. Even so, I used every justification I could think of to avoid being like another camper who unintentionally left it behind. It didn't make any sense. However, I didn't want to believe it was the worst. I didn't remain any longer than necessary. I was relieved to see my campfire and returned to what seemed to be the security of my camp. But as the minutes went by, I couldn't get rid of an odd sense that hovered over me, as if something wasn't quite right. However, I had no idea what it was. The sensation worsened until I recalled my pepper and knife spray, believing that I would feel safer if I kept them close by. However, that's when I became aware of the problem. Items were absent, my cooking utensils, matches for starting fires, knife, and pepper spray are all completely gone. My body stiffened. Someone was in this place. I packed what was left without even needing to give it another thought. And I heard it once again as I did, the sound of music coming from the shadows of the forest. However, it was closer, certainly not far from where I had previously discovered it. I quickly left the campsite, and sprinting toward the trail, I began to feel a little better as I continued and heard the music diminishing. I was still terrified, but I reasoned that I was getting farther away from whatever was out there because they had to be near the speakers where the music was coming from. I traveled along the path for almost 15 minutes, just strolling amid the silence, now forest, far from the music. At that moment, I noticed something lying on the dusty trail ahead. It belonged to me. Everything was vanished, including the cutlery, pepper spray, and knife. It was neatly arranged in the center of the trail. What was the catch? Prior to me grabbing any of it, I heard a rush of footsteps behind me. When I turned to look behind me, all I saw was blackness. I simply ran away, leaving everything behind. I jogged or fast walked the remaining distance after running for what seemed like 10 full minutes. Fortunately, I returned to the road after leaving that forest. I honestly have no idea what the hell happened to me that evening. I feel like I just managed to get away from some crazy person. It was almost as if they were experimenting with their cuisine. I never intended to return to that woodland, and I haven't. Anonymous' story. No. To an hour north of Fairbanks, Alaska, close to the White Mountains mountain range. I was camping alone on a trail. I had previously spent 2 days at the location, complete with my tent. I had built a bonfire early and was having a dinner around it when a man appeared just after midday. I was shocked since for the 2 days I had been out there, I had not seen any animals at all. Additionally, I didn't hear him approaching or even see where he came from, the wilderness or the trail. But he appeared to be a normal camper, complete with backpack gear. He also appeared to be fairly kind. All he asked was if I knew the location of the cabin. I knew what he meant, even though I had never visited the cabin he was referring to. An abundance of these public shelters, which resemble tiny huts, are available on nearby trails for short-term usage while hiking. They are typically only available on a first-come, first-served basis and are not adequately maintained. Over the course of my 2 days at this campsite, I noticed a distinct, narrow route leading into the forest, which I imagined led to one of those shelters. If there was a cabin out here, it was probably down there, I told the man. After thanking me, he turned to leave. I didn't give it much further thought. I was just shocked that there was another person out here. I spent the remainder of the day taking care of the fire and unwinding. I just wanted to take in the peace and beauty, because this was the last night I intended to spend here before returning. It was most likely 9 or 10 p.m. However, in Alaska, the sun doesn't actually set at this time of year. It becomes dark, although not as dark as it would be in most other locations. As the sun began to set and created a shadow over the forest, I noticed someone approaching me from among the trees. I recognized the camper from earlier as they approached. I was understandably perplexed as to why he was here, but he immediately clarified that he was unable to locate the refuge. Perhaps there wasn't one, I said. The man corrected himself, stating that he had never discovered the route I was referring to, and that he was expecting I would lead him there. I honestly had no idea. I found it odd that he had been gone for so long. Why was he returning hours later if he had never discovered the trail? If he wasn't staying in the shelter, what was he doing all that time? At first, I only tried to reiterate the location of the route, but he seemed determined that I take the lead. He said he didn't have a tent and was depending on that shelter for the night, which kind of guilt-tripped me. I decided to just walk him to the path, since I felt horrible about it, even though I didn't want to and thought this whole situation was a little strange. It wasn't very far. In any case, I started guiding him there after throwing my backpack over my shoulders. It was a 10-minute trek through the woodland where I was certain I had spotted it. The man was rather quiet the entire way there, We didn't say anything while we strolled together. Something seemed to have altered. However, 10 minutes later, I discovered the trail. It was precisely where I had stated, as if he couldn't possibly have missed it. Even more bizarre was the fact that I could see the shelter in the distance, toward its end, even though it was far away and much of it was blocked by trees. There's no way he couldn't have found it with the directions I gave him. The man didn't appear to be content even after we moved a little closer. He told me this wasn't the proper cabin, instead of saying thank you or whatever. I had no idea what he meant. We continued to walk till we almost reached the cabin. It certainly didn't appear to be in good condition, but using these kinds of public shelters always carries some danger. Really, you should never depend on them. With its cracked windows, rotten wood, and general appearance of being abandoned for years, this one appeared worse than others. As I looked at it, I noticed that the man had been silent. I pivoted. He had stopped moving, was about 10 feet away from me, and was brandishing a knife. His eyes were dead-eyed, and his face was rigid. In a flat, impersonal voice, he told me to enter. He told me once more to enter the cabin without responding when I tried to inquire what the heck he was doing. I had a lot of adrenaline. In addition to being furious that he had used my helpfulness, I was terrified since I was out here by myself with him. I came to the conclusion that entering the cabin was probably the worst course of action. We were still a good distance apart, so I put down my luggage and began running. Strangely, I didn't hear him pursuing me. Once I walked farther into the woods, I turned to check behind me, and he was still just staring at me while holding the knife. Once I was deeper into the forest, I located a suitable hiding spot and remained there for some time, most likely half an hour. I hoped the person would have enough time to get out. Next, on the front of the eye went stealthily through the trees in the dark, returning to the shelter. The man was no longer outside the cabin, or at least he wasn't there as he had been. However, my bag was also missing. I reasoned that discarding it would allow me to flee more quickly, but now that he wasn't pursuing me, I thought it could have been a poor choice. That bag included almost everything I needed. Everything, including my wallet, phone, and keys. I left the area in silence and headed back to my campground. As I approached, I sensed that I was no longer alone, and my heart began to beat more quickly. Then I noticed it. The dazzling light of a campfire in the center of my campsite. I assumed it would have burned out by now. I noticed that my tent was still up, and that the man was nowhere to be found when I moved a bit closer. It was simply the quiet, crackling fire and the almost peaceful woods. Then I noticed my bag, though. It was situated in the center of the campsite. I thought this was very suspicious, but there was a part of me that really wanted to run up and seize it. Why did he bring it back? He had to have. I was aware that I would return to the cabin to retrieve my suitcase. I would then return to the campsite if I couldn't find it. I was about to run up and grab it despite knowing all of that, and that this had to be too good to be true, when the man suddenly showed up. He nonchalantly emerged from the shadows behind the campfire, threw in a few more sticks, and took a seat. He was humming to himself, and I could hear it, as if he was at ease and simply waited. After turning around, I located the main route and hiked all the way back to the road in the dark. It took me hours to find a car that would assist me. After I alerted the police, they sent rangers into the forest early in the morning, but they found nothing. My belongings vanished as if they had never been there. In an attempt to hide the fact that it was ever a campsite, even the stones from the campfire were shifted and tossed back into the forest. The lodge out there was discontinued, which simply meant that no rangers were maintaining or servicing it anymore. The rangers also told me. I was quite uncomfortable after that meeting for a long time. I was unable to put my trust in anyone. Even though I've improved with time, I can't stop worrying about what may have occurred if I had gone. Either had attempted to retrieve my luggage or had entered that abandoned shelter. I was probably just one poor choice away from being in those woods forever. Story 3 by Hannah. If this incident occurred just 2 weeks ago during my first summer hiking trip. To the best of my knowledge, I was embarking on a fairly standard backpacking journey along a path in northeastern Wyoming. There was a 2-day hike along the trail, followed by a 2-day hike back. I had completed many paths like this, so I assumed it would just be a normal few days. After parking at the deserted trailhead, I set off on foot. The first few hours went smoothly. I felt like I was moving quickly and the route was peaceful. There were just 3 miles left before I arrived at the first campsite, which I would actually just be passing through before heading directly to the next one, which was 2 miles away and where I would spend the night. I pulled out a snack and sat down against the tree by the side of the trail because I was feeling a little peckish. I wanted to eat quickly and then resume walking, so I was just taking a break. However, when I was sitting there, I happened to glance up and noticed something eerie. On the opposite side of the trail, there was a man standing in the trees who was just staring at me without moving. I didn't know how long he had been there. He raised his hand and gave me an odd wave almost immediately after I established eye contact with him, as if he was attempting to be pleasant. However, the wave was nearly robotic. He was standing outside and staring at me, which made it look incredibly weird and unsettling. I chose to simply get up and carry on along the path. Even though I was certain he had nothing to do, I decided it was best to go. I had no idea what he was doing or why he was off the track, and I didn't give a damn as long as I wasn't around him. It took me over 2 hours to reach the campsite, since the remaining 3 miles were a little harder than I had anticipated. This was the one, as I mentioned, I was merely going through. However, because my break was cut short earlier, I made the decision to take advantage of the opportunity to prepare a larger lunch and have a longer rest before making the last hike to my actual tent for the night. I put down my rucksack and got out my little gas cooker to prepare my freeze-dried food by heating some water. After bringing it to a boil, I added it. Moreover, I heard footsteps coming down the trail. I was waiting for it to cook. I turned to look. I recognized the man from the woods. He wore blue trousers and a grey flannel, had a medium beard, and short black hair. He appeared to be in his mid-30s or early 40s. I saw a smile on his face as he approached, which I believe was meant to appear amiable, but it most certainly didn't, for him to arrive that quickly. He must have begun walking here immediately after I did. He greeted me as he approached and struck up a conversation, inquiring about the climb and other topics. I responded briefly in the hopes that he would follow the trail, but as he sat down directly next to me, my heart fell down. He was acting so overly amiable that it seemed as though he was being aggressively pleasant, and that he couldn't possibly be sincere. I was beginning to get pretty uncomfortable with him. I made an effort to finish my dinner fast, but the man persisted in questioning me. He once made fun of me for eating a homeless lunch, saying that I needed improved diet. He attempted to give me a protein bar that had been opened. I'm not kidding. When he took it out of his rucksack, the wrapper had already been opened, but nothing had been eaten. Naturally, I declined, but he was being very insistent. However, he eventually gave up and announced that he would be spending the night at this camping as well. So when I'm hungry later, he'll offer food to me. It was immediately relieving to hear that this campsite was where he was staying. I just needed to leave this place. After eating, I stated I had to leave since my friend was waiting for me at the next campsite. The man maintained his smile, but I could tell it was fake. He had a flat face. It was rather unsettling that he was just holding this clever smile. I turned to leave, looking back several times to be sure he hadn't followed. What was going on with that guy is beyond me. Perhaps he was just a kind person looking to talk. However, my instinct prompted me to get away. That's what I did. I arrived at my camp for the night a few more hours later. It was getting quite dark because the sun had already set. Even though I was exhausted, I had a feeling that I should put off setting up my tent and unpacking anything until later in case I needed to leave quickly. Thankfully, I did, as it wasn't 10 minutes. I heard those same footsteps crunching on the leaves along the route again later. The figure appeared a moment later with that eerie smile of his. I was pretty angry as soon as I saw him, which was obviously not a good move on my part. I thought I had tried everything to avoid this guy. I was furious now. He claimed to be residing at the other camp. What on earth was he doing here? Then, I questioned him directly, foolishly, whether he was following me, and I made it obvious that I was serious by the tone of my voice. However, the man simply chuckled and responded, "Yeah, I'm following you," as if he were being sarcastic. His foolish, eerie smile persisted, all over his face. After all that walking, he began to inquire if I was hungry, but I immediately grabbed my bag and ignored him. I didn't notice him follow me right away as I walked back the way I had come. However, I knew better than to put my faith in that. Exhausted, I made it past the previous camp and kept going until I was unable to. The first camp was perhaps a mile away from me. I strayed from the path. To be honest, I have no idea how far off I actually went. Most likely 200 to 300 feet. Then covertly erect my tent. Just in case, I kept nearly everything in my backpack. After that, I tried to fall asleep by lying down. Despite this really unsettling circumstance, I was so tired that I dozed out quite soon. However, in the middle of the night, my eyes burst open. From where the trail was, I could hear footfall crunching on the leaves. It had to be him once more, searching for me in the middle of the night while strolling through the woods. The footsteps approached, but as they continued down the trail, they began to fade. He failed to notice me. I booked it back to my car after waiting until sunrise. Fortunately, I never saw him again. After that, I had no idea where he went. To be honest, I believe I came dangerously near to experiencing something truly terrifying. I believed the weird man had some fairly wicked motives, so my contact with him could have been incredibly bad. In particular, the more I consider the protein bar he attempted to provide myself and the entire circumstance. Even now, thinking about it makes me nauseous.